Cool. So yeah, thanks for coming. The title's very strange. The talk is very strange, and I'm really excited for this one particularly because it's way out of my normal comfort zone. So this talk is a meditation, and when I say that, what I mean is it's not advice, and it's not specifically meant to change the way you work at all, which is probably all the rest of the content here today. And it's not meant to make you better at your job. Sorry, don't tell your employers if they paid for the tickets. It's about being connected to the things that we create and about seeing the beauty and the impact and the humans and also sometimes the tyranny in the work that we do. So I'm going to talk about some things in this talk that might either be alien to you or simply not how you interact with programming or the work that you do. And you know what, like if it's not the way that you interact with programming, that's totally cool, right? I don't mind if you don't see yourself in the way that I understand the world. It's neither like a compliment or a criticism. But I just want to take some time to ruminate about how some of the work we do makes me feel when I inspect it from a particular perspective. And I'm just going to put a bit of a disclaimer in here. There's some particularly coarse language. I don't normally excuse swearing, but there's some particularly graphic language in this talk that I can't really edit around because it's part of the work and it's quotes from other people. So I'm kind of apologizing for anyone seeing this later on YouTube if there's something that you might not expect, but I will try and censor it a little bit on the way through because it's being recorded. Okay, hands up. Does anyone know what this is a photo of? There we go. We've got a small handful of people. Right, so this is a photo of the famous and controversial piece of installation art called My Bed by Turner-nominated artist Tracy Emin. So Emin conceived of this piece in 1998 after going through a particularly messy breakup. And the piece contains crumpled tissues, period-stained clothes, cigarettes, vodka bottles, a pregnancy test, lube, and condoms. And as she emerged from the misery of a breakup, she turned the scene into this stark, introspective, autobiographical piece. In her own words, what she said, as quoted by The Guardian, is, "Well, I spent 4 days in bed, and I was feeling at a very low ebb, and for 2 of those 4 days I was asleep and I just didn't wake up. It was about this breakup of a relationship with someone I was really, really very in love with, and it was also about my own sort of desperation. It was a very romantic love in a lot of ways. It was almost like a 19th century bohemian, have you ever lived kind of moment. It was very romantic, and I was feeling the saddest kind of romanticism that anybody could ever imagine. Now, I could have written a broken-hearted love story, but at the same time, that I think is what I did with the bed." So, in response to that, Guardian journalist Adrian Searle wrote that the piece was an endlessly solipsistic, self-regarding homage by an artist who he called a bore. Very good. I think that's the most Guardian think piece way of a writer shit-talking someone for like being egocentric in very long words. But the stark connection to raw, relatable human emotion in a time before mental health was at the forefront of public consciousness, and at a time when not only a stark display of vulnerability, but like this really honest tone from a woman that was kind of connecting with a new kind of audience made Emin basically a struggling common artist who was part of the late 80s emerging kind of young British artists movement. She made her a household name because it was controversial and it was weird and it wasn't what most people thought of was art at all. So it was last sold in 2015 for £2.54 million. So I kind of hope if I'm endlessly solipsistic that I get paid £3 million for it as well, to be fair. So yeah, despite all of this, I've often heard it used as a poster child example of why modern art sucks, right? Or people don't understand modern art because, you know, it's just a shitty bed, or because it can't be art because it's somehow not beautiful. And I'm not talking about my bed here from like this deep personal connection or love of the piece. I think it's okay. But I think it's worth celebrating as something that did precisely what it set out to do, exactly what it set out to do. So fast forward to 2025, and we're in this funny place in the world where the kind of person that would look at Tracy Emin's bed and say, oh, I just don't get it, will be perfectly content posting a bunch of low-rent AI slop on the top of their blog posts, which ironically are complaining about the proliferation of AI. It's wonderful, very ironic. The world never disappoints. And it's kind of funny, right? It struck me that over the last couple of years, that as transformer model generated images have become increasingly popular, that it's forced a lot of technical people to contend with art for the first time. And now I don't mean technical people have never seen art before, obviously, but what I do mean is that a lot of technical people come from a background that's distinctly not grounded in humanities subjects. You know, if you watch the discourse around the current state of AI models, you can produce pretty high fidelity works, and you'll see art people everywhere bemoaning why this thing isn't art, right? And computers can never really make art, and then a whole different audience equally feeling lost in the debate, because in their eyes it all kind of looks fine, right? They don't really know enough about it to think anything else. It looks fine. And I kind of love the term AI slop, right? Like it's quite funny. I know people get angry. I know Satya got angry about it last week, right? But it's also like that term has gone through a significant amount of semantic drift in the year since it was coined, year and a half since it was coined. Now, this is common to a lot of language associated with AI, like vibe coding doesn't mean what it was meant to mean at the start. AI slop doesn't mean what it was meant to mean. But Business Insider wrote in 2024 about how, to quote, AI slop was meant to characterize the shrimp Jesus kind of slop, bizarre, obviously fake, and sometimes vaguely unsettling in a trypophobia triggering kind of way. Common themes involve old people holding a birthday cake and asking you to wish them a happy birthday, babies doing things that babies shouldn't do, snakes eating buses, bikes or other vehicles overloaded with hundreds of babies or some other cargo, soldiers with prosthetic legs, women with missing limbs and huge busts, and Jesus. The images are often sort of eerily exploitable. But as the ire with AI kind of rises, people are using slop to basically mean anything, regardless of fidelity, right? And I love shrimp Jesus. Actually, I think this might be art. So, okay. Anybody in the room, if I said, what is art, does anyone think they could answer? Go on, David, make it one sentence.
Art is partially in intent and partially in reception.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Art is partially in the intent and partially in the reception. I think that's a good sound bite, right? So I have a pretty simple definition that I use that leaves a lot of space. I think that art is the work that's left behind when an artist contends with the human condition, right? It's the way that an artist can affect change in the world. It's the work. And that's why a lot of things fit inside of that space, and it becomes very subjective, right? And I get it. And that's why, you know, it's open on purpose, and it leaves the big contradictions room to breathe. And I think that exact definition is why Tracy Emin's bed was art, right? And it's also why people didn't understand it was art who weren't close to art. They didn't realize it was the work of an artist contending with her human experience. Now, and this is the exact reason why some books, for instance, have artistic merit, while others can be pulpy entertainment. It's not a value judgment, right? Not a value judgment at all. It's not trying to instinctively elevate art as being more than, it's just a categorization. Now, it's why a mundane vase can be beautiful yet banal, and it's why art can be ugly yet poignant. It can be unpleasant, it can be violent. So art doesn't have to be beautiful, it doesn't have to be pleasing, and it often has something to say, right? But sometimes it can just be about evoking kind of a feeling, right? It can be, you know, not everything said is worth hearing, or innately of artistic merit either, right? So there's a lot of space in that definition. I think that's why people struggle to contend with it. And this is all basically first-year art student stuff, right? But to people that have never studied art at all, it's why it's often confounding, and people give up with platitudes like, oh, I don't know art, but I know what I like, right? It's the giving up. And it's the reason that films of Martin Scorsese are art and the Marvel movies are entertainment. Right? That's okay. So no, of course a computer can't make art. A computer doesn't have the lived human experience to make art. It's ridiculous. Just like a housefly can't make art. However, of course, a human can use a computer or basically anything at all to make art if they're coming from a place where they're trying to communicate something about the human experience or the way they're feeling. Okay, so how does this have anything to do with programming? Great question. So I've spent a lot of my career feeling kind of invisible. And I know that seems really ironic standing on a stage in a room full of people. I don't mean me personally, I mean we collectively. I kind of feel like we are invisible in the work that we do. We do invisible work. And when it works, it's unseen. People don't understand what technical people do as a general rule. They don't know what programming is at all. And it's long been difficult for people to reckon with that because they can't really point at it, right? It's not a thing that exists in physical space. They can't tap the sign. It's why if you talk to a non-technical person and say, hey, you do programming, they're like, oh, is this all ones and zeros? Is that what it is? It's like, no, of course not. Like, how do you not conceive of this at all? So it's really strange to feel invisible despite the whole world engaging in a hype cycle about your industry every 4 years since about 1980, right? Like somehow the most invisible yet most talked about thing. I remember this point really hitting home in 2015. So I wrote my first book. Now, don't worry about it, but my first book was a kid's book about computer programming. And it's literally for kids aged between 8 and 12. And I'll never forget how excited my mother was when I gave her a copy, right? And because this was despite her constant encouragement, despite her lack of knowledge, for me, she was always like, do the computer thing. You love the computer thing, do the computer thing. Thank you, Mother. But what I saw when she held this book was for the first time, she finally understood something that looked like my work, right? Like just this horrible moment. And it was a thing that she was really, really proud of. But for me, it was so bittersweet because I remember thinking of all the really impressive stuff I've done in my career, the book for 8-year-olds is the one that my mother is proud of. Cool. Right, okay, maybe kids' books is what I should have done the whole time. And you know what, that's fine. It's not her fault, right? And it's nice that she's still been proud of me, but in ruminating on that moment, it made me understand that I wasn't invisible. I was craving to be seen and understood for what I did. That was the difference, right? And I don't know if anyone has ever felt the same way. And it could be the program manager that doesn't understand what you did to make something work. It all comes from the same place. So in recent years, I've kind of taken to this mental model of thinking about the code that I write as art, as my works, right? I think it comes from a foundationally artistic place because it's the way that I contend with and affect change in the world, right? It's not to give it a sense of elevated importance. I don't mean my code is better than other people's code. But it at least captures that what I'm doing is work that means something to me, and it's me living and expressing my human experience. It obviously doesn't mean that every shitty piece of like throwaway code that I write is somehow imbued with this great meaning or philosophy, or it's like a beautiful work of genius. But so much of that work comes from a place that's important to me in one way or another, right? And I know I'm not the only one that feels this way because I see it everywhere when I look around now. And as soon as you start feeling that way, you see other people doing this. So over the past decade or so, I've been having this like pipe dream of an idea of trying to solve this problem. How do we feel seen? How do we make sure that people appreciate the work? And I've really wanted to put together like a traditional art gallery style installation that takes code that I think is either culturally important, intrinsically beautiful, aesthetic as software, or has like a distinct impact, and commission artists to try and contextualize it and like show somehow in a way that people that aren't technical can understand why this work is important to the people that do it. I've always imagined this as like a Somerset House kind of breezy exhibition, probably as a reaction to seeing loads of really low-rent attempts at discussing technology in works of art. It feels like it's something that has to come from technical culture to be legitimate. And I think whenever I see technical culture represented in art spaces, it's often artists who don't do technical work looking inwards rather than outwards, right? It never feels like it comes from our own voice. And I've especially wanted to do that with code that has had like some noteworthy human characteristic in the work. Code where you could see the extreme care or humanity in the way that it was constructed. I'm sure Royal Festival Hall will eventually come knocking if I just shout loud enough. But I want to talk about some of the ways that I now see people through the work. And I want to start that by talking about rocket ships. So a lot of people have tried to be seen in their work in different ways before. And for a long time, this was one of my favorite examples. But in putting this talk together, it's gone through its own interesting personal semantic drift. So the Apollo space missions were software projects. Of course they were, right? They were some of the first big complicated software projects. And the code that was written as part of them has been archived and stored and subsequently open sourced and shared by the MIT Museum. Now, I remember when this code was first widely circulated, or at least when I first saw it, about a decade ago, right? And I was reading the assembly listings of the program called Colossus. Now, Colossus is the software that runs on the AGC, the Apollo Guidance Computer. And my favorite thing at the time that I picked up on was that the launch routine, the file itself was called Burn Baby Burn. Right, and I was like, oh, that's really cute. And I remember thinking it was really funny, and I could just imagine the people sitting there listening to Disco Inferno and being like, I'm going to put a joke in here. It's going to be good. Someone's going to love it, right? It's also fascinating that this one project, which was led by Margaret Hamilton, pictured here, is often cited as one of the most important early woman-led programming projects, just as a side effect. Now, I've told people loads of versions of this story over the last 10 years about, oh, there's a Disco Inferno joke in the Apollo computer. So Apollo 11, and I'm not really a rocket guy, launched in 1969. Anyone know what year Disco Inferno came out? 1976. Ooh, interesting. So how did they write a joke about a song that didn't exist? Right, so that was what I learned doing the research for this talk. It was just going to be about the Disco Inferno bit. So attached to the source code listings of the shared assembly code, there's a note, right? And it says, let me read this. At the get-together of the AGC developers celebrating the 40th anniversary of the first moonwalk, Don Iles, one of the authors of this routine, along with Peter Adler, has related to us a little interesting history behind the naming of the routine. It traces back to 1965 and the Los Angeles riots, and was inspired by disc jockey extraordinaire and radio station owner Magnificent Montague. Magnificent Montague used the phrase "burn baby burn" when spinning the hottest new records. Montague was a charismatic voice of soul music in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles from the mid-1950s to the mid-1960s. Burn baby burn, master ignition routine. That was what it was actually named after. Cool. Now, curiously though, Adler has told this story differently if you do enough digging. And he originally attributed it to someone called H. Rap Brown, a key voice in the Black Panthers. Now, his previous story said this: we might not have been out on the streets, but we did listen to the news, and the two biggest news stories were Vietnam and Black Power, the latter including H. Rap Brown and his exhortations to burn baby burn. This was 1967, after all. Developer Peter Adler wrote in the Apollo Journal, a separate article. H. Rap Brown was arrested for murder in the year 2000, almost a decade before the subtle retelling of the story, which might explain the retconning of the reason behind the name. Now, whilst it's true that Montague appears to have originated the phrase, it was popularized by a black poet called Marvin X in his poem of the same name. I'm going to read the poem uncensored, roughly. Burn, baby, burn. Tired, sick and tired, tired of being sick and tired. Lost in the wilderness of white America. Are the masses asses? Cool, said the master to the slave. No problem. Don't rob and steal. I'll be your driving wheel. Cool. and he wheeled us into 350 years of black madness, to hog guts, conked hair, cowardice, bleached cream and Uncle Thomas, to Watts, to the streets, to the kill. Boom, 2 honkies gone. Mother, the police. Parker's sister too. Black people, tired, sick and tired, tired of being sick and tired. Burn, baby, burn. Don't leave them boss rags. Come on, child. Don't mind the tags. Get all that mother pluck. Get them guns too. We don't give a fuck. Burn, baby, burn. Cook out of sight. Feinberg's white front, Weinberg's black front. Burn, baby, burn. In time, he will learn. That was published in 1965. We probably won't ever know if the naming here was a joke or political support or cultural appropriation. But it most certainly is both human and art, foundationally art encoded in the software. Now, the fascinating thing about hearing that story is how it captured either intentionally or unintentionally the social context surrounding where the software was built. And it got me thinking about some of my own trite examples and apologies, far less poignant. The social context that we ourselves encode into the software that we write for ourselves and others. Now, this is my favorite comment of all time that I was personally involved in. And I love it because it captures a very distinct personality of 4 different people at a single point in time, at a certain point in my life. And I like it enough that I've got it saved in my Photos app 15 years later. So there's a story underneath this particularly complicated and horrible code path. It was like a take a payment, but it was 2,500 lines of spaghetti garbage. And it grown unwieldy, and it was horrible, and everybody hated it and responded with this same visceral ugh every time they opened the file. It was just like, oh my God, what's in here? And Rob got there first, and that's written in his exact tone of voice. I can hear it in his voice when I read it. Followed by, I believe, a contractor that was working for us at the time called Ben, who was very ex-military, very perfunctory, just left a note and moved on like everybody else. Yeah, refactor, too long. And then my inner monologue has been very consistent in the long term, and I just couldn't avoid getting involved in the joke. And then finally, a guy called John, who was quite witty, just dropped the final note on. And I just loved this picture of a bunch of people just being humans in the face of just some incredibly tedious work. And while it isn't art at all, it's a cultural artifact that makes me feel nostalgia, despite the fact that it's just some random throwaway shite. And I think of this kind of similar to tagging, really. It's a kind of art in the same way that graffiti in the real world can be anything from a tag to a piece. The intent is the same. I was here. I should get it on a t-shirt. Now, the more I think about this stuff, solipsistic as I am, take that, Guardian readers, I start thinking about my own personal tropes. I frequently apologize to fictionalized versions of my mother and when I do horrible things in code. I have written the comment, sorry, mum, so many times. My mother's never going to read that. Or occasionally, I just leave little stupid pictures for programmers of the future, probably myself when I'm doing something that I know is terrible or I'm giving up, and I just want to show a little bit of levity and contrition in the moment when I do a crime. They're all me just encoding the reality of doing this kind of work and the kind of humor of how I feel about it into the content. And I kind of feel like I am in all my work. Like I'm a character in the book, like the author is in a story. I don't think there's anything wrong with having your own tropes. It comes with technique and it comes with taste. I've occasionally joked in my day job that you could basically replace me with a cheap robot that says, have we tried looking at this through a different lens? Or could we just pull on that thread a little bit more? And, we probably become parodies of ourselves eventually. I think you all do. And it's horrible when you see it. Actually, I was telling some of my team this kind of thing about me becoming my own parody, and they said, David, that's not what you say. I was like, what do you mean? They say, my mental model is. And now whenever we go out after work, whenever I say my mental model is something, they make me do a shot. So over the years, there's been a huge amount of, self-portraits in software, maybe I should call them that, and the systems that people build. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at some of the more niche examples of this kind of self-identification. So first we have silicon chip art or chip graffiti. This stuff is really cool. So these are like tiny artworks embedded in integrated circuits, and they're often pinhead sized and printed with lithography. Lithography, I can never pronounce the word. The technique was originally used as kind of a pseudo copy protection, actually, because copies of the work went unnoticed to human eyes. So when people were designing printed circuit boards, they would put really tiny little signatures on, so if someone stole them in manufacturing and cloned them, they could tell it was their design. Whilst, this is kind of a legitimate form of signing, it just ended up becoming a popular pastime of designers to include kind of contraband artwork, and it could only be ever seen with like a really powerful microscope. Now, I especially like this design by engineer Yuk Hai Mok, who put a photo of himself and his new wife on the Silicon Graphics MIPS R110,000 microprocessor in 1996. So this is the successor to the computer that they programmed Mario 64 on, and there's a self-portrait of a guy getting married. Silly. Probably the most literal interpretation I can think of putting yourself in the work, though. And there's this wonderful bust of Marvel's Thor that's 1 millimeter square. And this was graphic designer April Comer, and she did this portrait for the Hewlett-Packard chip. And a designer called Darren Miller turned it into a bitmap and got it on HP's printer PCBs. Now, if we zoom out into some of the more human-readable dimensions, signing printed circuit boards is a relatively common practice, with designers signing, making jokes, using memes, and kind of other cultural references of the time, and just generally like making the things that they built their own. I guess hardware designers secretly have the most fun, you know? And finally, this is my favorite because I love music. I have no idea who did it. I did try and work this out, but I believe it's from the Boomerang range of looper pedals, according to some Wikipedia deep diving. But I can absolutely see the human in the work here, writing that, both to make them feel good and amused by the momentary delight that it might cause someone when they saw this. Like, one of the best feelings in the world, that for me, actually, is, seeing something so wonderfully executed, asynchronous from the author of the work, where despite this kind of temporal decoupling for a second, you can imagine what they were thinking when they did that thing. And I always have this story that sticks in my head. I remember when Red Dead Redemption 2 came out. I don't know if anyone's played it. It's kind of not as good as the one that came before it, but it's a perfectly beautifully executed game. I remember sitting on the sofa with a friend of mine, and just after you got out the introduction sequence, which is in the snow, and there's this moment where a cart goes and cuts through some mud, and some water runs into the divots of the mud. And I said to my friend, "Did you fucking see that?" And he's like, "What?" I'm just like, "You, anonymous shader renderer at Rockstar Games, I see you. I see the 7 months of your life that you put into making that water run into that mud for the 10 seconds that no one will ever see it. It feels great to witness mastery that's almost invisible to the world. Love it." So finding a way to claim authorship, especially in creative agency over work, isn't just something that came from the hardware hacking scene. It happened in gaming in the 70s too. So people have probably seen the game Adventure before, or at least aware of it. So Adventure came out in 1979. It was just called Adventure for the Atari. And at the time, games were notable, and they didn't allow programmers to have credits in the games at all because Atari was the brand. And in fact, the reason EA got started, the company that exists today, is they allowed the creators to have like film director style credits. That was their idea of the brand. Anyway, so this led to probably the very first Easter egg in a game that I know about, where you had to do the following to even see the name of the programmer, who was called Warren Robinette. I'm going to have to read this. So you have to select Game 2 or Game 3. You need to get the bridge. Find the maze north of the Black Castle. Look for the room that is flickering. The flicker is due to an extra item hidden in the room related to the Easter egg. In the flickering maze, use the bridge to get across the chamber in the bottom of the middle of the room. Go to the lower right-hand corner of the small chamber and you'll pick up a single pixel. Carry that single pixel to a room just above the catacombs, located exactly one screen down and one screen right from the yellow castle. Don't worry, the pixel will be invisible unless you rub along the southern border. Drop the invisible pixel in this room with a barrier on the right-hand side. retrieve 2 more objects, the key, the sword, and the chalice, 3 more objects, and drop them in the room. Once there, and there are 3 objects in the room, including the pixel, you can walk through the rightmost wall to view the Easter egg. That was how this guy got his name in his piece of software. Like, imagine being that scared of your boss. So there's also this really strong through line from the early microcomputing era to the computer culture that led to circuit and chip signatures and modern generative art, right? Now, despite the reputation of programmers for being kind of cold, analytical, stoic people, early hacker culture actually, and specifically the demo scene, was kind of awash with creative programming. Like, this was everywhere. If you've not heard of the demo scene before, it grew from underground computing clubs and early bulletin boards in the 80s and the 90s, wares scene. Funny story, until I was like 15, I didn't realize the word wasn't wares. And it was wares, like shopkeepers' wares. Whenever there's a word that you only read, right? So various teams always competed in these invisible competitions and sometimes actually in-person real events to produce creative, genre-pushing graphics programming, often in like really super constrained computing environments. So while I'm not sure if the people at the time would have really identified the things that they were doing, it absolutely was art. Like, it, in both the literal sense, in that they were making pretty pictures, and in literally the cultural sense, in that they were using their shared love of computer programming to build a shared culture that they were then trying to capture in a work, exactly capturing the human experience. They were producing art, and they probably didn't know anything about art. So the art may well have been implicit, okay, but the kinds of genre-pushing graphics that they produced not only survive today, but were actually the genesis of some of the world's most famous game development studios, like Remedy Entertainment, who went on to make the Max Payne games, and Alan Wake and Control. They were a little hacking group. I just think this is incredible, right? And the other side effect of the demo scene is it also gave way to crack intros. So one of the other artifacts of the early piracy scene was that groups, probably still do, used to race to break copyright on games. And what they would always do is they would append their own little graphics slideshows at the starts of the ROMs that they put out. So if you've ever played I swear, legally obtained Nintendo game off the internet, you might have seen someone else put some credits at the start of it, and that was these same people. And, you know, these ripping groups are effectively leaving their virtual fingerprints behind as they race to be first. And I think, to me, that the demo scene and crackthrows are probably the most conspicuous leftovers from the microcomputing era of hacker culture, which kind of is very underground now. And, you know, works made to look good and capture culture. And I honestly kind of think that the race to crack games and produce trainers and crackthrows is probably as worthy of preservation as artifacts now as the games that they were cracking. Which is kind of, I don't know, maybe it's ironic. So past the obvious avenues then where computer art is explored, like Hollywood CG and digital paintings and things like that, there's still this kind of rich culture of generative and procedural art that is fundamentally coming from this creative space that's alive in technical culture today. My friend Elena actually recently shared some work that she's been doing with me. She shared with me some work she's been doing. That's better. Which deliberately bridges these two disciplines of writing software to help drive machines that are deliberately trying to create mixed media art. There's something gloriously human to me about mixing those two. I want to play a little bit of video that she sent me to show you a little bit of what she's doing, because I think the process is really cool. If I can find my mouse cursor to click play. There we go. Now, I'm very, as a programmer and someone that likes pretty things, I like the melding of two techniques, right? I think this is really cool. And, you know, Elena's an excellent engineer, and she's a speaker that you might see on the circuit from time to time. I've been trying to convince her to do a talk about exactly this thing. I think she's going to do it. So I guess when this video goes on YouTube, it will be a good moment of peer pressure for that, to manifest that into reality. So while code that generates art is intrinsically interesting, I don't think that it comes from the same place that I was in when I was contemplating how people don't understand programming, right? The thing about programs that create art and the output is more the output is more traditional. Like if you write a program that makes a pretty picture, it's very easy to take it to a gallery and people go, oh yeah, you've done an art. I get it. But I was wondering, is there really a way where we can make the output, the piece that's made for consumption, actually the work itself, like the software? And I think, most programmers over time develop taste. They start to understand what software they find inherently pleasing. And now I'm not sure that everybody would be able to articulate exactly what they thought good looked like, or even why. But my suspicion is that it's always related to a bunch of kind of ingrained cultural norms that grow around programming languages. So I do think there's a kind of shared mental model that emerges when you focus on the aesthetic quality of the code and how you can use it to design and telegraph intent. Fashion changes, but like good design is evergreen. So I want to look at a few examples of how like taste is cultural. Now, it's the reason that the sample on the left looks good to a C# developer and the one on the right looks good to a JavaScript developer. Brace style, right? It's the eternal debate around it are just cultural norms encoded in the formatting of code. It's nothing more than taste. And we've had 20 years of people arguing about it, and I can conclusively say no one's made a good argument. It's just taste. And it's the example everybody uses because everyone's seen a brace before, right? It's easy to relate to. So when we, of course, know that this is God's own brace style, right? Like, come on. You have no idea how hard it was to stop the auto formatter from correcting me just to make this slide. And this is dissonance, right? This is dissonance, not in the same way as dissonance exists in sound, but it comes from the same place. So if you opened a code base that followed this kind of we're going to call it one true brace style. It's the one true brace style. You'd feel the dissonance. And any programmer that looks at it, if you imagine opening a code base with that in it, you'd just be like, oh no, someone's hurt these people. What's going on? Now, okay, so what I've done here is I've deliberately subverted the norms to make you feel that dissonance, right? That's what I've done. And you could probably build software that was literally intended to be art as observed by a programmer by using dissonant formatting. I could use it to make you feel bad. It's clearly dangerous at runtime data structures, right? We could do something like that. We could use dangerous code to communicate a feeling. So I think you could definitely write a program to be intrinsically art. So I suspect if you showed this to a random non-programmer, though, wouldn't make them feel anything at all. They wouldn't tell the difference. Okay, but there's an idea here, isn't there? I told you this was going to get weird. If art is an artist contending with the human experience, can I make the form of my code share something about my experience deliberately? Or write code where it's a commentary in a way that someone literate in the medium might understand? Cool. So here's a HTTP server I wrote in x86 assembly, right? And it does work. I say I wrote, mostly ChatGPT wrote it. Who has time for that? After several attempts, but it does compile and it does work. So this is simultaneously completely useless code. It's not a thing that needs to exist at all. But also it's something I thought about when I wondered how I could describe the overabundance of technology that's often applied to very simple things. I explicitly wrote this to say that thing, right? And I'm using an anachronistic form, an assembly language for something that often goes designed and over-applied and over-designed in higher level languages. And what I'm trying to say is like, why are you doing all this stuff? Because you could just do this. Like that's all, it could just be this. Though it does make me wonder, like, even if I know what I'm trying to say, if it's completely impenetrable to basically anyone but like 3 dudes from 1976, is it really valuable art? Is it valuable to use this form, right? It's interesting as a thought experiment, but perhaps I could turn it into a valuable work, but I'm not sure it's this. This got me thinking a lot about the code that I see in like hashtag enterprise systems and how like utterly careless, mundane, messy, and frankly shit so much of it all is, right? and we've all seen this. I have a whole other talk about this kind of slavish dedication to software design and how that's the only salve for the general unpleasantness of much of the rote enterprise garbage that you see everywhere. But it makes me wonder if we can celebrate beauty, both kind of inherent and implicit in our software, and also explicit and authored in a code base, could we use the careless mess of some kind of commentary on the state of like untended and uncared for systems? The carelessness of so much enterprise software really kind of tells on itself, right? Like it kind of looks exactly as shit as the software is, like most of the time. But I'd be fascinated in taking some of the worst pockets of code in enterprise systems and maybe visualizing them against, say, I don't know, the stock market value of the company that runs them, right? That'd be kind of funny, wouldn't it? And you know, maybe the yearly profits of the enterprises that neglect their software so readily. I think you could probably make a meaningful artistic statement about the state of software development and with a work literally constructed from the code itself and contextualized with the real world impact of that kind of software on the world and the business it operates in. And you know, I think people might understand that. And there's a lot of ideas in here that could work, right? Like maybe we could take snippets of the Twitter source code set against election results. Maybe we could take some beautiful shadows rendered by Carmack's Reverse, the Doom 3 real-time shadowing system, stenciled. Yeah, beautiful things, ugly things, all framed by their impact. And I think that's what I was reaching for originally when I had that idea of like, what could an exhibition be that really helped people connect to what software was? Could we take code that was used for oppression and set it against the backdrop of political imagery? If we did, would the goal of the software be visible from its form? Or would we be upset when we realize that the code that we use for tyranny is probably the sum of the most effective code we write in the industry? The systems that we design to spy on us are probably pretty high quality, actually. So it might sound like a drab kind of political point to make, but reckoning with the thing that I've spent over kind of 30 years of my life dedicated to, being used for some of the things that we see it used for in the world today, is kind of a harrowing and gut-wrenching experience when you actually lean in and think about it. And it probably should be. Like, we should probably feel those feelings. So, fine. Despite the obvious misgivings that I have to contend with about the corporate excess of some of our industry, this kind of line of thought also reminds me of one of the most flattering things someone once said to me as part of a job. So about a decade or so ago, I was helping out a team, and they were struggling with this flaky, horrible batch process thing. The whole thing was like 700 or 800 lines of spaghetti copy pasta. Like, one of the things that I'm good at as a jobbing programmer is sitting quietly with the work and just pushing it around until its form emerges. Like, I like changing it, reverting it, changing it, experimenting until I find the right feeling shape for a thing. And I took this program home on an evening, and I made myself a drink, and I just kept on pushing it around until I found its shape. And the answer wasn't a revelation to me, right? It was a declarative, kind of deferred execution style batch processing pipeline kind of shape, where each of the key processing steps was just easy to sight read and scan down. It's a gentle art doing this kind of work. So, and the truth is, pipeline style operations are really easy to do this to, right? So it was an easy win to make something look idiomatic. Anyway, so I checked this thing in with like a pretty mundane, very flippant, it's 11 p.m., ha 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 ha, fix the fucked up thing kind of comment. And the next morning, when the nearshore team came on board, I had this like absolutely gushing over the top message from the team's tech lead, just being like, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my entire career. And I was just like, wow, kind of flattered, but like, it was just a moment. But I think it's that exact experience again. It was someone else. I think he saw me in that work doing that process, and he was like, oh no, I actually love this. This is cool. And I think it really gets to the heart of what an obsessive kind of aesthetic sensibility gets you when you apply it to code. You know, I took the time to make something look beautiful because it telegraphed intent, and the code itself was beautiful because it captured the flow of the execution in its form, right? And it was inherently beautiful in a way that's only possible in code. It was like genre specific. And this other guy who I met maybe a week earlier just saw that. He just saw it. And I made it that way because I have to, because I am compelled to, because it makes me feel good to work that way. I like the intrinsic beauty of it. And you know what? It was just some shitty line of business app. I don't even remember what the data we were processing was. Like, objectively, just kind of garbage. But it was my work. Right? It was my work, and it was kind of, it was art because of the process. It was about how I felt. So if we can see the ugliness personified in the tyrannical software that we write, I think we should just as readily celebrate the inherent beauty in code written with love and care and intentionality as well. Okay, so as we finish, I want to play you one of my favorite clips from a better David than me. So this is David Bowie, who knew a thing or two about what it was like to make great works of art. And whenever I'm thinking about what I want to do or where I want to go next, this clip is always in my head. And there's no sound, of course, because I haven't plugged it in. But there's a cable here. And do I have a headphone socket? No, so we're going to turn the volume way up on my computer. Oh, look at you. Chris, you're a beautiful man. You're also a liar. It's okay, I got this. Output device, speakers. We're going to play it, and we're going to volume up, and it'll be worth it, I promise. Right. Come on, David, you got this. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse cursor.
Never plays the gallery. I think, but you never learn that until much later on, I think. But never work for other people at what you do. Always remember that the reason that you initially started working was that there was something inside yourself that you felt that if you could manifest it in some way, you would understand more about yourself and how you coexist with the rest of society. And I think it's terribly dangerous for an artist to fulfill other people's expectations. I think they generally produce their worst work when they do that. And if the other thing I would say is that if you feel safe in the area that you're working in, you're not working in the right area. Always go a little further into the water than you feel you're capable of being in. Go a little bit out of your depth. And when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting.
R.I.P. Mr. Bowie. You know, he was never sure if it was Bowie or Bowie because he made it up. So if you ever hear him interviewed, he switches between the different pronunciations of the surname. He never picked one, which is somehow the most David Bowie thing that could ever happen.
Never plays the game.
No, we've already done that, David. Okay, so in coming back to this first question, can AI, unfettered, make art? Well, what if I wanted to capture and mirror the technology that internalizes and mimics the labor of workers in a medium that does the exact same kind of synthesis? Let's try a prompt. Okay. Make me a hellish, grotesque painting depicting the exploited workers of the Industrial Revolution being replaced by machinery. Dante's Inferno, workers subsumed into industry, organic matter, machines made from bodies, human forms incorporated into machines. A bit meta, but let's see where it goes. Can I make something ugly using a blunt, unfiltered instrument which represents its method and its place in social context and history? I think I can. This is pure AI slop that's meant to be slop. It's violent, ugly, and it's no good. Even though I used a tool to say a thing, it doesn't make the work good or valuable. There is nobody in this work. Hope this has been thought-provoking. I think I'm probably going to try and make that art exhibition. And I'm going to say it on record to nerd snipe me into doing it, right? Because it's embarrassing otherwise. I hope this was a new lens for you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming.